All right, everyone. I have right at 11 o'clock. Appreciate everyone who has joined us today for our second Cattle Over Coffee webinar. We are covering nutrition this morning. Dr. Genevieve D'Souza is a new face for many of y'all. She is a new beef cattle scientist at the Brown Long Branch Experiment Station in Raymond. And I think, like all good nutrition people or all good extension specialists, her background is nutrition, like me. So she's going to visit with y'all about cattle nutrition. She's got a variety of topics this morning. So I will go ahead and turn it over to you, Genevieve, to get started. I will have, I'll ask, I'll kind of hang around at the end. I've got just a little evaluation for y'all to give us some feedback on what you thought about things and what kind of topics you'd like to see in the future. So Genevieve, I will turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Brandy. And thank you everyone for tuning in this morning. 11 o'clock is usually a time where I'm having my third cup of coffee. So I didn't have that third one today, just so we could talk a little bit slower. As Dr. Karish mentioned, I'm new to Mississippi State. I'm originally from Texas, and then I crossed the river, and I guess I'm stuck over here now. I am a nutritionist by training in my background. That's what I have my PhD in, and that's what we're going to talk about today. The majority of my talk is focused on the reproducing cow herds nutrition. If you have questions about stocker nutrition, backgrounding nutrition, or even if you are doing some of your own custom feeding to finish, I am here to answer your questions. I have a lot of training in that as well. My contact information will be at the end of this PowerPoint, and feel free to reach out to me. And my one plug for Brown Long Branch is that if you guys are in the Jackson area and you don't mind driving 30 minutes south, come and visit us. We have some pretty cool stuff going on over there, and we're always happy to share with our producers what we're doing at Brown Long Branch to further research for Mississippi and the Southeast United States. So without further ado, let's get into it. Just a little bit of an overview of what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to go over some basics of cow nutrition. We're going to do a little bit of math on a balancing act. We'll talk about where we find nutrient requirements, changes in requirements based on the stage of production, and then we'll talk about cow nutritional status on pasture. So let's start with cow nutrition basics. I'm going to drink some water while we're talking about this. So approximately 40% of the cow-calf enterprise's costs are associated with nutrition. That can be purchased or harvested hay, purchased concentrate feeds or supplemental feeds that you'll feed to your cows over the fall and the winter. Delivering feed is a cost because we use fuel for that. Any costs associated with improving our pastures through bush hogging, rotational grazing, fertilization, all fall within that 40%. I know depending on your operation, that number might fluctuate, the percentage. So it's just depending on your operation. To a lot of producers, the 40% is the easiest way where we can cut costs and save money. As a nutritionist, I'm going to say no. We should never be cutting costs on the nutrition of our animals because that is affecting our productivity of our animals, and that's affecting our bottom line. If we're selling weaned calves and we affect the nutrition of those weaned calves, that means we're not going to be selling as heavy of calves as we possibly could have been if we affect their nutrition. The same thing goes with our reproducing cow herd. If we cut her nutrition when she's in peak lactations and we cut down what we're supplementing her at that point, you're going to wean a light calf. And so playing with nutrition is a little bit of a tricky lever to touch, but at the end of the day, you will always see a return on that investment into your herd. Nutrition is a large part of reproductive efficiency of our cow-calf herd. We as scientists, define reproductive efficiency as the time to breed back, ability to maintain a pregnancy, the ability to calve without dystocia, and the ability to wean a heavy calf. So all of that is a definition of a beef cow. And so nutrition plays a large part in her job on our operations. Now, part of reproductive efficiency is also genetics, the physiology of the animal, how we're managing our animals, as well as the environment. So heat stress or cold stress or continuous rain, which is what we've had here in Raymond for the last 2 weeks. And today, this is our first week of sunshine. All of these other things, all of these other things also play a role within the reproductive efficiency of our animals. I would say that nutrition, I'm biased, right? So nutrition is still a large part of it. One thing that we always talk about when we talk about cow-calf operations is our genetics. And I think genetics are really important. It's good to have a good foundation. So if you think about building a house, you always want to build a solid foundation, and that's our genetic program. That is where we build everything off of. So if you pour, I don't know, I'm from Texas, so we pour a pretty okay foundation over there. And so if you pour maybe, I don't know, a 6-foot foundation of concrete, best concrete in the world, and then you find a whole bunch of sticks to make your house, well, your house is probably going to blow over in the next rainstorm. Or it's like the 3 pigs situation, right? One makes them out of straw, one makes it out of, ooh, this has been a long time, bricks, and then the other pig, I think, went to market. So if you make your house out of bricks using good nutrition, then you have a solid program. And where I'm going with this example is genetics is our foundation. Everything that comes on top of the foundation is nutrition and the growth of the animal. So if you use the straw or the sticks to make your house, which is going to be using poor nutrition for your animals are going to be in poor status. And that affects your operation for years to come. If you take your good foundation of good genetics and you use bricks, so you use good nutritional methods to build up your herd and maintain them, it'll pay back year over year over year. And so today's talk, we're going to talk about mostly nutrient requirements. To talk about nutrient requirements, we're going to talk about nutrient basics first, which is here. So when we talk about nutrients, we talk about energy. We talk about protein, macrominerals, microminerals, and vitamins. If you tuned in last week, Dr. Rushing gave us a talk on forages, so pasture improvement. He talked about hay improvement. And I think he also talked about something about planting legumes into your pasture to increase the crude protein of your pasture. And so that's something that Mississippi State Extension has done a really good job of talking about, which is increasing the crude protein of your pasture or the forage that you're having available to your herd. I'm not going to sit here and talk about crude protein because you guys have probably heard it before. I'm going to talk about energy. Energy and protein go together, and if you have a lot of protein and you don't have a lot of energy, not good for the cows. Other side of it is if you have a lot of energy and you have no protein, also not good for the cows. So you need both of these aspects together to advance and make that brick house of nutrition for your cows. So when we talk about energy, it's defined in 2 different ways. One would be megacalories, and that is on a label. Well, you would never see it on a label, but it's defined as net energy. And there's 3 different kinds. We'll get into that in just a second. Or you'll see it as percent TDN, which is total digestible nutrients. And that's probably something that a lot of producers are more familiar with. That's something that we have commonly used when we talk about energy to producers. As a nutritionist, and this is probably the hill that I will die on, I don't like TDN. I think it is an oversimplification of the situation. I more prefer things like the net energy system, which is what we'll talk about in just a second. When we talk about protein on a label, it'll always be defined as percent crude protein. That would be the amount of nitrogen available to the animal in the feed stuff. When we do hay analysis or forage analysis, it also talks about crude protein there. Our microminerals on a label are defined in a percent of dry matter. These would be, we're going to talk about the macrominerals on the next slide. Our microminerals are defined as parts per million or parts per billion on our labels, and these are the smaller ones. They also play a critical role in the production of the animal. They're also known as trace minerals. And then lastly, vitamins. As you know, vitamins are important to humans and vitamins are also important to cattle. And so those are always defined as international units. When we talk about these smaller nutrients, macro minerals, micro minerals, and vitamins, these are the ones that we're talking about for cattle. So for cattle, we're talking about calcium and phosphorus. For cattle, for macro minerals, we're talking about calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, sodium, potassium, and sulfur. And these should look familiar to you if you're probably over the age of 30, because these are also important to us as adults as a supplement to us. The microminerals for cattle are iron, manganese, copper, zinc, selenium, cobalt, iodine, chromium, molybdenum, and then nickel. And so these would be also known as your trace minerals. There is some research coming out of our units in North Mississippi. So the Prairie Research Unit and South Farm, I believe, are doing some research on our minerals. Brandy is part of that, and also Dr. Harvey up at Prairie Research Unit. So they do a lot of this kind of mineral-based research using organic versus inorganic minerals. If you have questions on that, Brandy can talk about it at the end of this talk. I'm not the best expert on organic versus inorganic. What I can tell you is that the research is very interesting, and I would be pro organic trace minerals if you asked me in a conversation. The vitamins that are important to cattle that we need to supplement to them would be A, D, and E. So A, D, and E are our fat-soluble vitamins. They are not as common well, they're not really present in forages or the plant matter. And so it's important that we always are providing a free choice vitamin and mineral supplement to cattle so they can meet their A, D, and E requirements. I will also put up here K and B. So vitamin K and the B vitamins are important to cattle as well. Vitamin K is very important for the microorganisms in the rumen for them to have their efficient growth. And so that is why you might see that on a label, is because we're feeding the microorganisms in the rumen, which then feed the cattle. The B vitamins are a special case. And so if you have a really great functioning rumen, you would never really need to supplement B vitamins to the cattle because the microorganisms in the rumen make all of the B vitamins that the cattle need. Now, I do know that sometimes we give a B vitamin injection, which is when a calf is probably not thriving as best. So we recommend a B vitamin injection, and that's kind of just a jump start to the calf for them to get going. If you think about B vitamins are the vitamin that helps energy, and it helps the growth, and it helps all of the functioning things. And so when a calf isn't thriving, that's when we would give it a B vitamin. At the same time, in the same conversation, we should know that a calf doesn't have a functioning rumen. And so if you ask the question, well, why did I have to give this B vitamin injection to a calf? Well, it was never getting its B vitamins from its rumen. It probably didn't get enough B vitamins from its mom when the colostrum transferred, and that's why it's having this failure to thrive situation, and that's why we give the injection. Normally, we don't supplement B vitamins to cattle because the rumen microorganisms do produce the B vitamins for the cattle. However, sometimes you will see it on a vitamin and mineral label. That is to feed the microorganisms, which then feed the cattle. So when we talk about cow nutrition basics, there's a question of what are the most limiting nutrition components for all cattle, and that is protein and energy. And so we always say that protein is the most limiting, and I have to agree that protein is always the most limited ingredient. There's not always a lot of protein out in our pastures. There's not always a lot of protein out in our hay. And so that's something that we are always supplementing to cattle. As I said in the beginning, I'm going to talk about energy. And so the reason for that is because the microorganisms in the rumen require a lot of protein to grow. But we know that you need energy so you can use the protein to grow. And that is the same for the microorganisms in the rumen. And so I would say that energy and protein go hand in hand as what is needed for growth. It's just that it's kind of like a delicate balance of you need this much energy so you can use this much protein. and you need this much protein so you can use this much energy. And so it kind of goes hand in hand. And the entire time you have to think about, you're not feeding the cattle per se, you're feeding those rumen microorganisms so that they can feed the cattle through VFAs. And that's what I have here. So energy follows protein closely because without adequate energy, the microorganisms cannot use the protein for growth. So here I have a little bit of an example of some of the math that a producer could do on their own operation to figure out nutrient requirements and where their cattle are falling short from pasture or from their hay, and then where we can bring in extra supplements. So, for example, we have a mature beef cow in her second trimester of pregnancy. She eats approximately 28 pounds of dry matter a day. She requires 4 pounds of protein or crude protein on a daily basis to support her calf's growth inside of her uterus. Her rumen requires 75% of that protein to function properly. The pasture she is grazing is about 7% crude protein. Is this cow meeting her protein requirements by solely grazing? So with just a little bit of math, and this is not an algebra talk, so I'm not going to get into it. You can see that from what the cow is eating, first you can see what her microorganisms require in terms of protein. In the problem here, I said that she requires 75% of her protein is for the microorganisms, so they need about 3 pounds of crude protein on a daily basis to function. And then we can see how much protein the cow is getting from her pasture. So she's eating 28 pounds of dry matter a day. We know that the pasture has come in at 7% crude protein on a dry matter basis. So we multiply her intake times the crude protein of the pasture to get how much crude protein the cow is getting from the pasture. And what we can see here is that the cow is not getting an adequate amount of protein from her pasture to support her growth or support the microorganisms' growth. And so we would say that the cow and her rumen are short on protein. Now, when we talk about requirements of cattle, this is a very in-depth look of where the protein is going. When you guys look at the requirements for cattle on tables or in the books or things like that, just know that we have already included what her rumen needs into that number. So just balance off that number and you should be good and golden. I want to break this down into energy as well. And so that same cow requires 9 megacalories of net energy maintenance per day to sustain her pregnancy and her body condition score. Her rumen requires 65% of that net energy maintenance requirement to function properly. The pasture she is grazing is about 0.12 megacalories per pound dry matter. Is this cow meeting her energy requirements by solely grazing? And so if we do similar math out again, we would see that she's also short on energy from the pasture. So at this point, we know that this cow could eat all the grass that she would ever want, but she would never be able to digest it because her microorganisms in her rumen did not meet energy or protein requirements. And we would also have to realize that we'd probably see some loss of condition and body weight from a cow just eating this pasture because there's just not enough out there for her to get what she needs to sustain her pregnancy, to grow her fetus inside of her uterus, and also to maintain her body condition score. And so when you're doing this on your own property, you could do something similar as this kind of balancing. I think this is recorded, so Brandy can share that link with you so you guys can see it. What I would say is do just that bottom energy cow is getting from pasture, or the previous one says protein cow is getting from pasture, to figure out where your pasture is meeting her requirements. And so there's a question of where do you find your cow's nutrient requirements? And so you can find it in a couple of places. The nutrient requirements of beef cattle is the nutritionist's Bible, if you would like to say that. It's where I would find all of the requirements for any herd or what stage of production an animal is at. It's an amazing book, but it's in kilograms, and we are in America and we love pounds. And so Brandy has done a really good job of putting together some extension publications, and the link is right here on here, but we can also share it later, of the nutrient requirements of beef cattle, but it's converted into a pounds basis or TDN or megacalories per pound. So that's a lot easier for us to digest and like one less conversion factor for us. And so this is where you would go to find the nutrient requirements of beef cattle. I didn't put the link on the slides, but I would say that Oklahoma State University Extension also does a really good job of putting together a very producer-friendly set of tables for requirements. And so if you go here or if you find that Oklahoma State one, I'm okay with it. They're the same information. One is just, I'm more used to using it on the other side of the river, if I can put it that way. The other thing that you would need to know is the nutrient densities of what your cows are eating. And so some ways to figure out the nutrient densities, when I say nutrient densities, I mean like percent crude protein or megacalories per pound or percent for the minerals or parts per million. So where do we find those kind of values? We would need to sample our pastures and hay. And so I think Brett had talked to you guys last week about how to sample pastures or your hay for their nutrient densities. The commercial supplements that we feed will have the crude protein, the minerals, and vitamins detailed on the feed tag. That's required by the American Association of Feeds. And if it's not there on the one bag that you're feeding, you can call the feed store and they can text you a picture. What you'll never find on a feed tag is the TDN or the net energy maintenance or the net energy gain or any of the energy components because it's not actually required to put on the tag. So what you can do is call the manufacturer of your commercial supplement, and they should be able to tell you that over the phone, or their nutritionist should be able to give you a call back with that information. An easier way might be to just go ahead and sample your supplemental feeds. And so where you send off your pastures and hay, there's usually a bigger functioning lab, and they can analyze your commercial supplement or your commodity supplement for their nutritional density. When I say commercial supplement, I'm talking about what you buy at the feed store. So pellets, cubes, any of those mixes that come in a bag. Essentially, if it comes in a bag, it should have a label. When I talk about commodity feeds, I'm talking about if you just buy corn and cottonseed and you put that in a bunk, that's a commodity feed. And so there you would take a sample of your corn and cottonseed at whatever rate you usually feed it at and send that off to get your nutrient densities back. You could also just send your corn and cottonseed separately and then do some math to figure out what that is in the middle and then go from there. All of these feedstuffs can go in a Ziploc bag and be sent off. Most of the time, your commodity feeds are dry unless you're using wet distillers grains or something that is actually wet. And so dry things can go in a Ziploc bag and be sent. Wet things probably need to be dried and sent or frozen and then sent. So even your silages and baleages, these are wet feed stuffs for cattle. You would need to freeze that before you send it off to get sampled for nutrient density. If you want to go off of the averages, Brandy has also put, I forgot to change the title here on the extension publication, but Brandy's also put together pretty good feedstuffs for beef cattle with their nutrient densities. The one caveat here, if you use the values from this link, is that these are averages. So that doesn't mean that the corn that you're feeding at that exact time has the same energy as the corn that we have on this table. And that's why I would really, 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 really recommend sampling what you're feeding to your cows, because the only way that you're going to know the nutrients that are going into them. And so a good example of, you know, where the charts might fail you for these feedstuffs is if we talk about hay. And so I'm sure Brett talked about this, but the book values for hay are based on an average of, you know, a whole bunch of different places in the world, in America. And so if we talk about Bermuda grass hay, that could be people who do manage their Bermuda grass hay. So they're putting down fertilizer, they're cutting it at the right times, they're baling it at the right times, they're not letting it get rained on. That would be some very good quality Bermuda grass hay. It also includes averages of people who do not cut their Bermuda grass at the right time. They do not bale it at the right time. They let it get rained on and washed out. They put their bales outside. They don't take care of their bales. And so just know that the value in the book or on these charts is a little bit skewed as opposed to what you do at your operation, which is why we encourage sampling your stuff that you're feeding to your cows so you know exactly the nutrients that are going into the cattle. So let's talk about nutrient requirements of the beef cow. Here is a chart from the NRC, which is the Nutritionist Bible from 1996. And it shows you guys the fluctuations of the energy requirements, which are on the left-hand side, and the protein requirements, which are on the right-hand side of the beef cow months after calving. So month 1 would be where she's calving. Let me see if I can pull up a little pointer real quick. Here. So right here is where the animal has calved. And so that's where we would consider the start of her nutrient requirements for the next 12 months. So at calving, you see this kind of relationship between crude protein and TDN. 30 to 60 days after calving, the cow reaches her peak lactation. So that's the time that she's producing the most amount of milk for her calf. There you will see an increase from the time she calved until peak lactation of requirements for TDN and crude protein, and that is to support her genetic potential of milk. And so between these 30 to 60 days, you definitely want to make sure that you're putting down supplement or you have enough body condition score to make sure the cow is getting to this point of her genetic potential of milk. After she reaches her peak in lactation, it starts to taper off on what she requires to eat. She is still lactating at this time, but the quality of her milk and the nutrients in her milk is starting to decline. And with that is also a decline in her nutrient requirements. And so if you're worried about what's going on with the calf, between 30 to 60, at 30 days, the calf is still on her dam. After 30 days, the calf is learning to recognize that he or she needs to put her head down and mimic eating. And so this calf will start to eat the grass. And so the reason that biology is a crazy thing, the reason why her requirements and her milk production starts to go down or wean off is because the calf is beginning to eat grass, develop its rumen, and get its nutrients from the environment around it. And so then there's not so much load on the dam to produce enough milk. So going back to this chart, right around here, around month 5 or 6, or maybe sometimes 4, depending on when you wean your calves get weaned. And so for us at Brown Loam, I believe if this is September, October, November, December, January, February, March. So somewhere here between months 6 and 7 is when we wean our calves at Brown Loam. And that's when you would see a steep decline of nutrient requirements for the cow. The reason for that is because she's no longer supporting a calf. So her nutrient requirements start to wean off or lower for the animal. Right here at month 7, this would be her entering the second trimester of her pregnancy if we bred her back here in December. So that's when you see her requirements starting to tick up again. And the reason for that is to support fetal growth. And so it's a big fluctuation and change. I had removed the labels, but if we had said this is September, this is March, and then this is over here at August, if you put the months of your calving season here, I would definitely recommend putting also where your grass comes up and where your grass doesn't come up. It kind of helps you understand where you should supplement your cows and where you shouldn't supplement your cows. So a good example for us at Brown Loam is that we know that our warm season grasses are kind of dying off by the time we hit peak lactation. And so at Brown Loam, we're going to start supplementing a little bit to our cows when they're in peak lactation so we can meet those nutrient requirements because our grass quality doesn't have a lot of nutrients in it at the time. And then if we talk about, over here between 3 and 4, that's usually December to January for us. And so we know that the nutrient requirements of the cow is declining, but they're still pretty high. And we know that our cool season forages have gone into dormancy. So what we'll do is we'll hay our cows and then we'll put a little bit of supplement out just so that we're still meeting the requirements of the cow during the winter month because there's not a lot of nutrients growing in our pastures at that time. Then around weaning time is when our ryegrass is really coming back and it's having a really great season. So for us this year, our ryegrass had a really good season from March until April. And so that's when, we might not have to supplement our cattle because they're getting a lot of nutrients from the ryegrass. Now, there are times and seasons where our grass doesn't do as well as we hoped, right? And in those times, important to sample and important to follow the nutrients of your cow and important to follow the body condition score and know that we're going to have to supplement our cattle. So let's talk about energy. I know that you guys are super excited about it. So energy in the rumen is partitioned into different sinks. If you want to think about energy, I say, think of it like a set of overflowing sinks, like the faucet sink. And so at the very top of these overflowing sinks, you turn on the faucet. You have to wait for the first sink to fill up before it overflows into the next sink. And then you have to wait for that one to fill up before it overflows into the next sink. And so knowing that, and think of that picture when you talk about energy for cattle. So when we talk about energy, we would say that the feed has all of the energy that the cattle needs, right? They can't get their energy from the sun. They're not plants. And they don't get it from anywhere else from the water, right? There's no energy in water. So all of the energy that the cow will ever realize is in the feed that they're eating. That feed is described as gross energy if we're talking about the net energy system, or it's described as the total digestible nutrients. All of that feed goes into the rumen. And then the microorganisms in the rumen use that energy to make volatile fatty acids. And then the cattle use those volatile fatty acids as their energy source. And so this is the first sink where the energy flows into. And they're just taking the currency of feed energy, and they're converting that currency into a cattle currency of energy, if you want to think about it in a very basic term. So now we have gotten our energy from the feed, we've converted it into something that cows use, and now let's talk about our cow. And that goes for our net energy maintenance. So the very first sink for the cow specifically is maintenance. And maintenance includes her ability to walk, breathe, muscle development sits here, muscle like maintenance, I would say, not development, sits here in the maintenance requirement. For a beef cow, that also includes her ability for reproductive efficiency. So we'll get into that in just a second. But other things that are also included within maintenance would be ability to cope with her environment around her. So things like thermoregulation, if a cow is in heat stress, that's part of her maintenance requirement. The ability to grow a good winter coat and then slick it off in the summer is part of her maintenance requirement. So there's a lot of things that sit into this maintenance sink. Think of it like a super huge sink. And the next sink after that is growth. So for our beef cow herd specifically, we don't really talk about net energy for growth. And the reason for that is because they've grown. They're mature animals. So we don't talk about it there. Stockers and backgrounders and people who are finishing their cows out for custom feeding, we're going to talk about growth there because after we make this maintenance sink, then we have to get to the growth. And that's just something that's a little bit more advanced than today's talk. When we talk about maintenance requirements for the beef cow, her requirements include reproduction requirements. And the reason for that is because in the beef industry, we have defined the sole purpose of a beef cow is to produce a calf. Every year, year over year, her goal, her job is to give us a calf. And so one thing that Dr. Harvey likes to say up in North Mississippi is that there's no free lunch, and there is no free lunch for beef cows. And so she needs to produce a calf, she needs to produce a heavy calf, and she needs to get, after she births that calf, she needs that calf to show up at weaning. And so all of her requirements in the books are geared towards that ideology. And so one thing that's different for the beef industry as opposed to the dairy industry is that the dairy industry will break out lactation requirements separately. The reason for that is because lactation is where you get milk from. And so it's very important for the dairy industry. For us, it's not so important. So we put those lactation requirements into her maintenance requirements. So what I just talked about is described here in this chart. This is, again, months after calving. So this is the first month of calving, and that's the 12th month after calving. What we can see here is that for her energy requirements, 60% of her energy requirements all the time is for her maintenance. So like I talked about, breathing, walking, having the brain cell to have a thought, regulating herself in the environment that she's in, knowing to protect herself when there is a predator, or having her dynamics. All of the things that make a cow is in that 60% energy requirement. Here, this dark gray part is the pregnancy. That's 10% of her energy requirements over her year as a cow on your operation. So 10% of those requirements are just to sustain the pregnancy. And then a large part, 30%, is for lactation. And so that is why we are supplementing cows when they calve and through the winter, if you're on a fall calving season, is because we want to support her maintenance and her lactation, especially when the grass is short. If we were to break out the energy requirements a little bit differently, we could see how each stage of her production, or what her body is doing at the time, is requiring energy requirements. So the purple line down here is going to be her breeding requirement. What percent or how many mcals of her requirement is just specific to the breeding part of her. So that's growing her fetus, conceiving and then growing the fetus. The red line is lactation, and what part of the energy requirements of hers goes strictly to lactation. You see the peak, that's when she gets into peak lactation, and then usually by month 12, I hope she's dried off. There is a requirement here after you do weaning, but that's to support mammary gland regrowth, and then for her to develop that bag of milk for her next calf. But it's very minimal as compared to breeding. The blue line is maintenance. Like I said, she always has a maintenance requirement, and then the black line would be that total summed up. And so these are the ways that we get to this black line, is all these different things that feed into the requirements for cattle, beef cattle. So I included this just to describe where the requirements are coming from on this previous one. Here at breeding around month 8, you see that the line sharply increases. And that's because of this exponential calf growth that's happening from month 6 of her gestation until she calves. So a lot of her energy at the very beginning is very minimal for her to sustain a pregnancy. So here in stage 1 of calf growth, you can imagine that she is, it's about 2 or 3 months after she's calved. Her requirements for just breeding are pretty low. The reason for that is because she's probably already getting supplement for lactation, and then that's spilling over into fetal growth. So we're pretty good over here. And the growth is pretty slow for a fetus for a conceived embryo within months 1 through 3. Between months 3 through 6 of now it's called the fetus, you'll see a little bit of growth. She'll have a little bit of requirements, and that's what we're seeing over here. We're seeing a little bit tick up of her requirements for energy at that 6 through 8 months. And then you see an explosive growth of the fetus between month 6 through 10, 9-ish, through month 6 through 9 of gestation, and that would be that last part of growth of the fetus, which is where you're seeing this right here. So that's what describes the breeding line. Right here is weaning. And so we had a conversation here at Brown Loam about, why do we supplement our cows right after weaning if the ryegrass is coming up and then going down, and then our summer annuals are coming up and going down? Why are we supplementing our cows at this point with a little bit of energy? And the reason is because during the summer, she goes into that explosive calf fetus growth. We have to supplement to meet her requirements. Now, if your grass is really good, if you fertilize a lot and you take care of your pastures, most of the time you don't have to supplement them. We have 2 separate herds out at Brown Loam. We have one that has a little bit more of a Bos indicus genetics into it. And I like to make the joke that if the wind blows, they would get fat. And that's just because they have a really good genetic foundation to convert the pasture that they're eating into energy, to support their fetus growth, to support lactation, and to support them getting fat. We have another herd that has a little bit, I'm not going to say wobbly, but a little bit of a rocky foundation genetically. And so they don't have the same ability of the wind blowing and them getting fat. And that's the herd that we supplement, just because we want to make sure that they're also weaning a heavy calf. That's a whole separate conversation of how you should precision feed your herds. We can talk about that later. If somebody reminds me, I can talk about it, but we're not going to touch on it in this just exact moment. It's just an example of, sometimes some herds need energy supplementation in the summer, and sometimes herds do not need energy supplementation in the summer. And before I step off of this soapbox of energy supplementation in the summer, a lot of things that I hear from producers is that if you give the cow energy, she's just going to burn it off in the summer during heat stress. And I would argue, let her. And so the reason for that is that there's a lot of energy that goes into heat stress and thermoregulation, which is another talk in itself. And if you were to give her something that's very digestible in terms of energy, let her burn it off. Because at that point, that means she's converting your pasture into what she needs for her body. Touch base with me if you want more on that. That is a platform that I could talk about probably until the cows come home. So back to this, we'll talk about fetal growth and nutrient supplementation. And so here, this is a little put together chart of a lot of research that has gone into nutrient restriction or nutrient supply to the fetus during its growth. And so here at the bottom of this chart, this is the growth of the fetus going from conception when it's an embryo, and then when it becomes a fetus, into birth. And so these triangles talk about what's going on in the body of the fetus or the embryo at the time. So it's, between months 0.5 to about 3.5, we're talking about where this calf in utero is putting on muscle protein. And then between months 2.5 to months 7.5, we're talking about a different kind of muscle development inside the calf. Between 4 and 9.5 months or at birth, we're talking about where the calf is putting on fat for it to sustain life outside of the uterus. And then hypertrophy is the word that you would use to talk about explosive growth of the muscles. And so a lot of research has been done about when we restrict the cow's nutrients and what happens to the calf. And so the first one here, it talks about nutrient restriction reduces myogenesis, decreasing muscle fiber number and muscle mass in offspring. And so essentially what they did for this study is that they restricted nutrients going into a pregnant cow during these months of the calf's growth. And they saw what happened on the other side. And so what they found was that if you restrict the nutrients going to the calf when she's pregnant, you will have a decreased rate of myogenesis or muscle fiber number and muscle mass in the offspring, which isn't really good if you're going to be growing or if your calves are destined for the feedlot, right? You want them to have a lot of muscle fiber number, muscle mass, and myogenesis, because that makes a heavy calf at the feedlot. When we talk about the next one over here, if we restrict nutrients between months 6 and 9.5 of pregnancy, it says nutrient restriction reduces muscle fiber hypertrophy, decreases birth weight. And so here it's talking about when we're in that explosive growth of the calf, if we restrict the nutrients to the dam, what happens to the calf? You birth light calves. And so light calves are good because they come out pretty easy, but light calves stay light calves at weaning. They stay light calves at the backgrounding operation. They stay light calves at the feedlot. And at the end of the day, someone is paying that feed bill to get them to the weight to get slaughtered. Or if it's a female, we are birth the light calf. We're a light calf at weaning. It takes us longer to get to puberty. We might not breed in the first first AI that you're doing, or the first exposure to the bull. It might take us a little bit to get there. That sets back your calving season. So it's a lot to wrap your mind about, but what you did to that calf in utero changes her entire life as a replacement heifer for you. Or what you did to that calf in utero changes the steer's entire life at the feedlot. And it's so crazy to think about, but these are the things that we're researching and putting out there. So the last one I have here talks about steers, and that's nutrient restriction reduces adipogenesis, which is decreases marbling in the offspring. And so what they did here, again, between months 5.5 to 9.5, they restricted nutrients to a whole bunch of dams. Those calves from those dams were followed through the feedlot. And it was seen that if you restrict the nutrients in these months for a cow, their offspring do not marble as well at the feedlot. So this entire slide is to talk about why we should always be feeding the nutrient requirements and or exceeding the nutrient requirements for cows, especially during this last part of pregnancy, because it changes the productivity of the calf for the rest of its life. It's a little bit crazy. This research always blows my mind when I read it, but it's just something to think about. If you are a producer who is weaning your calves and selling them, I would say we could have a talk about like if this is important to you or not important to you. But I will say reputation is everything in the cattle industry. And if a stocker, a backgrounder knows that your calves don't really produce super well at their operation, or if a feedlot producer knows that your calves don't always perform the best at their operation, that makes a reputation. And so that's why it's important that we're always bringing the best calves to market with the greatest genetic potential. If you're retaining your replacement heifers, this is for you, this slide right here. And so in this study that Dr. Harvey has done, which is up at North Mississippi Prairie Research Unit in North Mississippi, she had heifers calve. And then what she did is fed them at different target average daily gains to see when they get to puberty. So this doesn't talk about what we kind of touched on in the last slide, but it kind of grows from there about supplementing our heifers and making sure that they are getting enough feed. And so here, low target ADG, I believe they were eating just pasture. Medium target ADG, they were eating a supplement, and then high target was a lot of supplement. And what she did was looked at when these heifers came into puberty. So these are developing heifers. And what we saw, or what she saw, was that heifers that were supplemented on pasture to target a certain average daily gain came into puberty or estrus a lot sooner than the heifers that didn't or received low supplementation. So these, I would say these are a pasture only. This would be like a creep feed situation. This is the high supplementation rate. So if you look over here at this graph, what you can see is that heifers with supplementation, with a lot of supplementation, came in to estrus just about 2 weeks earlier than ones with low supplementation. And so what this study had found was that accelerated body weight gain post-weaning advanced the puberty onset of the calves. And this is where we talk about why we should supplement our developing heifers. It brings them into estrus sooner, they breed back faster, they maintain a better pregnancy. And so a lot of factors going into the nutrition of the reproducing cow herd. There are no differences in milk yields. That's a whole different story. We can get into it if you want to, but just know that we're feeding our developing heifers a supplement just so that they come into estrus sooner and they are more able to maintain a pregnancy longer in their life. So the last thing I want to talk about, and I know I'm almost out of time, is cow nutritional status. So we'll go talk about this really quickly. And so it is not like a good efficient use of your time to bring your cows to the chute and get a body weight on them once a month. We don't even have time for that at Brown Loam. And I'm sure as a producer, you don't have time for that either. So we talk about body condition scoring for our cow herd. That tells us how much fat and how much muscle is on the animal. It also gives us a leeway into knowing how to change our supplementation for our cow herd. So we're just going to touch on, I think, four body condition scores in this talk. It goes from 1 to 9. 1 and 2 would be a walking skeleton or a skeleton who can't walk, and that would be in reverse order. And then anything above 7 is obese. You'll start to see fat on the animal. We don't really ever want we don't ever want our cows to be higher than a 7. That can lead to dystocia, problems with breeding, things like that. So that's an obese animal. So some animals that we see are a body condition score 3. Sometimes they have, well, most times they have problems breeding. That's because they're in a poor body condition score. They don't have a lot of fat on their body, and their muscle isn't the best that it could potentially be. A way to describe a 3, if you're looking at your herd, these are all different pictures from different university extension programs. You'll see prominent hooks. You'll see prominent pins. Her top line will not be flat. You can almost probably see some spinous processes if you took a top view picture. You can see almost all of her ribs, and this was a really good picture to look at. This one is one who's a little bit hairy, but it's the same thing here. She doesn't have a really good top line. Her hooks and her pins are very prominent. She just looks like a skinny cow. I'm not really sure about Oklahoma State. I think this picture is not correct. So don't really look at this one. And this is a drawing from the University of Minnesota. We don't really want our herd at 3s. At 4s are okay. And so now I have a bone to pick with Georgia because I don't really understand why this is there for. But let's look at Oklahoma State's. You can see that she's got some coverage on her hooks and on her pins. Her top line is starting to fill out. And then over here, it's the same thing. It's a little bit more fleshy. And so at Brown Loam, we reserve about 5% of our herd to be a body condition score of 4s. And that's really reserved for our old cows. So the ones that are probably over the age of 10, this is her body condition score. She's over the age of 10. Sometimes our 8-year-olds also look like this. But she is bringing us a calf that's heavy at weaning every year. So she gets to stay, even though she looks like this. And so we accept some of these in our herd. Our goal at Brown Loam is to have our cows looking like this most of the time. So anybody who's over the age of 4 should be a body condition score 5. That's a filled out top line. That is a almost not visible from a distance, hooks and pins. In 4, you should be able to see 3 ribs. In 5, you really shouldn't be able to see her ribs, no matter how she moves. And so this is what her body condition score will look like. You will see some fat deposition right here underneath her neck, as well as in her brisket. That's just showing you that she's able to put on fat. And so we keep our cows here at a body condition score of 5 most of the time. Our heifers, so replacement heifers, first calf heifers, our second calf heifers, until they get about 3 years old, are running at a body condition score 6. So it's a much thicker animal, if you'd like to say that. One thing that I tell our farm workers and a body condition score 6 is one juicy booty. And so if you look here, it's the best picture. It's really filled out. It looks like a really good steak. And so that's a really good sign of fat deposition and muscle growth in that animal. Her top line is filled out. She might have some fat deposited in her neck, which you can see here in this picture as well as this picture. She'll have a good brisket. She'll have fat underneath here. That's a body condition score 6. This is where you want your heifers to be at. This is where their calves probably won't pull them down from lactation. Body condition score 7 would be a fleshy animal. So this is a good looking animal, I'd say. We probably want to make her steak pretty soon if she looks like that. And so what I would say here is sometimes we might get here with our supplementation and our feeding strategies on our farm. It's totally okay. Just put her out on pasture and she'll go back down to a 6, I promise you. And so we can calve out here at a 7 as well. Not really recommended. Probably better to stay between a 5 and a 6, but this is also a good spot to be. And so I know I talked a lot and I know we only have about 5 minutes left for questions, but I want to open it up to questions of what I've talked about today. I know I covered a lot of material. And yeah, this is a picture of our steers at Brown Loam. We have the best sunsets I think I've ever seen in my entire life. And so, yeah, what do you guys have to hear? Thank you for the opportunity to talk.
Thanks, Genevieve. I think there was certainly a lot of really good information in there and something that I hope everybody can take home. I know we've got a lot of folks still on, some producers, some extension agents. So if you have questions, I think I've got everybody muted right now, but you can either unmute yourself to ask a question or feel free to type it in the group chat. For those of y'all that are on a computer and have the opportunity, I also just launched a survey, an evaluation. Just tell us a little bit about what you learned and maybe what you might like to see in the future in this program. So I will open it up for questions.
Randy, I don't think I did that great.
I think you did a fantastic job.
I know that a lot of what I talked about seemed a little bit disjointed because there's so much information that sits within beef nutrition. So if you do have questions and you don't have the opportunity to ask, my contact information is here. Please give me a call or send me an email and we can talk about it.
I have a question.
Sure.
Okay. I have a small beef farm in Attala County. I've seen some advertisement on sometime I can't remember the name of it, but it's a liquid wormer. It's concentrated. You just add it to your water, pat it. Are you familiar with that? I'm sorry, I don't have a name to tell you the name of it.
I am not familiar with liquid deworming products. We do have a vet who's part of our group extension group. If you'd like, I can ask him about it and get back to you, or I can do some research into that. That's just not something I've heard of recently. Brandy, do you know anything about that?
No, I know there are some dewormers that are available in like a block or a cube farm. So Safeguard is fenbendazole, which would be normally we'd give to cattle as a drench. It's a liquid dewormer. It also is available in a block or in cubes. Horses are in a paste. I'm not aware of a dewormer that you can add to water. I probably have some concerns on consistent consumption, just trying to make sure that every animal is getting the right dose, because most of our dewormers would be dosed on a body weight basis. So making sure every animal consumes enough, I think, is something that's really important.
One thing that it could be a similar product. There are liquid fly preventative methods. So there are some feed through fly control that are put into liquid feed. So it could be a product like that that's aimed more towards fly control, but I haven't heard about one for dewormer. And it wouldn't be something that was put in water. It would be something that was added to an overall liquid feed supplement.
Thank you.
Of course.
And if you do, you said you're in Attala County, right? If you do think of that after the fact, if you want to reach out to Bo, you've got Dr. D'Souza's contact information, but he knows how to get a hold of all of us on the extension team. So if you think about that after the fact, Bo Varner is a good resource there as well
Okay.
in Attala County.
Thank you. Yes, he is. He's a good resource. Thank you.
You're welcome.
My name's Brad Brewer. I live in Jasper County. I have a very small seed stock and commercial mixed herd. As far as supplementing calves, I've always been pretty intentional about not doing any creep feeding with my calves, just because I want to ensure that I've got the right cow herd that's doing what they're supposed to be doing on their own without my intervention on the calf side of it. But thinking more about the health and the nutritional value that the cow's getting, do you see that like creep feeding or supplementing the calves or whatever, start them at 3-4 months, something like that, is beneficial to the cow as well as taking some of the burden off of them on supplying the nutritional requirements for the calf, or is it just to benefit the calf?
Usually creep feeding is just to benefit the calf. We don't creep feed here at Brown Loam. What we do is we let the calf be on the dam until we wean them, and then we'll feed after that. Creep feeding is good for ruminal development, and that's really the reason why we do it. And that increases the calf's ability to digest in the pasture that it's eating, but that doesn't change the innate response of the calf suckling on a dam. And so I wouldn't ever say that creep feeding changes how much the calf can bring down a dam. There's a whole bunch of like physiology and biology and stuff that goes into that response of suckling for the calf. And essentially what I'll say is that creep feed sits in the rumen and it gets fermented. And what the calf is getting from the dam goes straight to the small intestine. So it just gets sucked right in. And so there's no really feedback response on which is the right one. And so it doesn't really help the dam out in the long run. The only thing I can think is just heavier calves.
Okay, no, thank you, because I've struggled with that one.
One of the
We,
benefits with-
historically, when we give our 2 rounds of vaccinations, one at 5 months, one and again at 6 months, and after that vaccination is 6 months, we introduce the calves to feed, not so much to help with weaning weights or anything like that, but more along the lines of when we do wean at 7 months or shortly thereafter, they're already accustomed to eating grain every day, and they're to just try to minimize the stress on the calf.
Yep.
But I didn't know if I should go any earlier, but it doesn't sound like there's a beneficial reason to it as far as the cow stand.
That was going to be what I was going to chime in. The biggest benefit to creep feeding right before weaning is getting them used to eating feed. So they're basically bunk broke before weaning. So you answered your own question a little bit there. Genevieve, I don't know if you can see the chat, but there is a question in the chat about B vitamins.
Could you read it out? I can't see the chat, sorry.
So JD asked, are B vitamin injections beneficial across the herd when bringing in backgrounding calves while we have them in the squeeze chute?
Loaded question.
So I will preface this. JD is stalker in some calves, so he's probably referring to some high risk type situation, lightweight calves and stalker operation, if that helps.
So if we are talking about high risk calves, I would say yes, a B vitamin injection is good. It stimulates the immune system. If we're talking about known calves coming from a known farm and they don't have any like BVD, BRSV incidents, I would say you could probably skip out on that if you're not seeing any snotty noses or very high risk animals. B vitamins do help the immune system, so it would help in that situation of a high risk calf. can see the chat. Is there another question in here? Oh,
Just that one.
oh, perfect.
Any other questions for Dr. D'Souza? Well, hope everybody had iced coffee today, because it is pretty Mississippi summer outside. It's come on in full force. So I hope everybody is staying cool and you were inside for a few hours here in the middle of the day. If there are no other questions, I will thank you, Genevieve, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for everybody who filled out our poll.